to I Have No Idea What I Am Doing, a new fortnightly show all about learning. I thought it'd be interesting to record myself learning a new technology in a kind of let's play format. So you can learn along with me, and I literally have no idea what I'm doing as I'm going through it. You can tell me where I'm going wrong, and we can learn together. In this particular series, we will be learning Vuex. Vuex is basically Vue-flavored Redux. It's a state management pattern for Vue apps tailored specifically to Vue. It draws heavily on influences from Redux and Flux and the Elm architecture, and is basically a top-down, one-way bound state management system. Full disclaimer, I have used Vue before. I used Vue back when it first started, and it was still before version 1. I made an app using it. I made it terribly, if I'm being perfectly honest. I have used Vue 2 for a very small application, which was a pricing calculator. So, really, I have some idea what I'm doing rather than no idea, but that title was nowhere near as catchy. In order to learn Vuex in the best way, we are going to create an example app. Now, this isn't going to be a standard example app, which is a to-do list or a counter or anything like that. We are going to be creating Devs Against Humanity, which is kind of like Cards Against Humanity with a little bit less profanity. More on that later. But first, let's dig into some examples. So the most obvious place to start is the Vuex documentation. There is a link to that in the description below here, if I've remembered to put it in. If not, just Google Vuex. It's one of the first things that comes up. Release notes, don't care. Installation, I can go back to that. What is Vuex? That's where I want to start, really. So Vuex is a state management pattern plus library for Vue.js applications. It serves as a centralized store for all the components in an application, with rules ensuring that the state can only be mutated in a predictable fashion. It also integrates with Vue's official DevTools extension to provide enhanced features such as zero config time travel debugging and state snapshot export/import. Yeah, alright, so basically it's the same as Redux, just for Vue. We've already established that. If you've seen Vue before, this should make perfect sense. There's not a lot to it. We've got some state up here, we've got a view, and we've got some actions. If you've seen any kind of JavaScript frameworks before, you can kind of map these onto your understanding of JavaScript frameworks, or, like if this is React, this would be the state, this would be the render function, and this would be, actions. I don't know. Okay, so this is the Vuex model, I guess. It looks very similar to what I'm used to with Redux. You've got Vue components, which are like React components, I guess. They dispatch an action, which is very, very similar to Redux. This action then commits to a mutation, which talks to DevTools. This is where I'm not sure what a mutation is exactly in this context. I've not heard that phrase before. I guess we'll find out. And then that mutation mutates the state. And then that state then renders the components, and it's all one big cycle. That makes sense to me. The mutations bit is new to me, but I can live with that until I learn what mutations is. It might just be something that talks to the DevTools. Maybe not. The actions at this point, that's where you talk to the backend API to, I would assume, get and set information depending on what the action is. But it's these three bits, the actions, the state, and the mutation, that are what Vuex is. And then Vue is this bit outside here. That makes sense to me. I like that. I can work with that. It's good. It's good. Getting started. At the very center of a Vuex application is the store. A store is basically a container that holds your application state. There are two things that make a Vuex store different from a plain global object. Vuex stores are reactive. When Vue components receive state from it, they will reactively and efficiently update if the store state changes. You cannot directly mutate the store's state. This is the only way to change a store state is by explicitly committing mutations. This ensures every state change leaves a trackable record. After installing Vuex, let's create a store. It's pretty straightforward. Just provide an initial state object and something. Okay, so let's install Vuex. Let's jump back. Where are we? Getting started. Installation. Direct download. npm and yarn are our three options. Dev build as well. All right, okay, we don't want the dev build. We want a stable one. Yarn and npm are good, and we will probably use them, one of them at least, on the eventual app. But since we're just messing about, I'm going to use the direct download CDN, and that's here. This is Orit Planet, which is just a Geordie hello world script. Source equals that, and I'm going to hazard a guess that Vue is just the same, but with the X dropped off. Do we have Vue? Yep. And do we have Vuex? Yes. Okay, very good. We will be using ES 2015 syntax for code examples for the rest of the docs. If you haven't picked it up, you should. I agree. Yeah, if you haven't looked at this, we do have a video all about ES6. We have one about the state of JavaScript. I'm doing this based on the assumption that I can actually put these videos up here. I don't really know if I can or not, but we'll find out, won't we? After installing Vuex, let's create a store. It is pretty straightforward. Just provide an initial state object and some mutations. Using the module system, we are not. So const store equals new Vuex store state and mutations. I am going to just copy that, and I'm going to create a new script. Okay, so there's our store. Okay, so we want the console here. I know there are better ways to open the console. This is just how I do it. It's like a muscle memory at this point. Right, so store.commit increment console.log style. I'll just copy that. Let's see if we get 1. If we get fewer than 5. Okay, fair enough. Put 1 here. Oh, this is a mess. Okay, cool. Get rid of them. So what is that doing? So we've got a new Vuex store. There is a state on that store, very much like React, with a count of 0. So this is the initial state, I guess. Mutations. Oh, because the mutations are just methods on Vuex. Yeah. Increment state state.count plus plus. I'm assuming this will come into play later. Right, that makes sense. So state.count goes up by 1. When we call this theory incrementing state, on this commit, increment state 1. Right, okay, good. Okay, we have gotten started. Core concepts. We will learn the core concepts of state, getters, mutations, actions, and modules. Okay, so we've kind of looked at state and mutations already. Very briefly though, I'm assuming we can go into a little bit more detail with these. So, single state tree. Okay, so this is my understanding of this part of the chapter. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. But we create a store saying new Vuex store. This is what we had from the previous chapter. I'm not changing this. And then we have a counter component, which is just a div with a count inside. And then there's a computed property in there, which is where it gets the data from, and count, which is this. We just return store.state.count, which is store.state.count. So the same way we logged into the console previously, we're just pulling that into this counter here. And in order to render this count component, we create a new Vue app on the hashtag app element, which is here. We pass it the store. If you're not used to ES 2015 or ES6 or whatever you want to call it, that is basically the same as not writing that, but doing this. Store. So that says the store key on this object is equal to the store constant up here. But because they're named the same thing, we can simplify that and just write store. The components we want to set is just the counter, the counter component that we set up here. And the template for this app is just a div with a class of app and this counter component rendered inside it. Okay, so when this renders, we just get all read planet with a count of 0, which is just this count here. And we can see if we do what we did last time, and we do store dot commit increment. So commit increment, it's 1. Do it a load of times and it's 7. So this is just essentially rendering that count into the DOM. However, there is one more way to do things, and this is potentially easier. And that is with the map state helper. There are 3 different ways to do this, but what seems to be the simplest is just simply to do map state inside here. Oh, that should be an array. What was it called? Count. Map state is not defined. Because we do Vue X.map state because of the way that we've. Normally you would write something up here that's like import map state from Vuex. But because we're not using module loading, we can't do that. So we just have to do vuex.map state here. So that's store. Next up, we have getters. Let's do some more reading. Okay, so chapter 2, getters, done. Getters are actually really nice. They are kind of like filters in a way for your computer properties. So inside the state we have this array of to-dos, which is it's an array of objects that have 2 properties, done and text. So what we can then do is inside our getters we can get all the done to-dos, which takes in the state and it returns the state to-dos, filters them out by all the to-dos that are done, so it only returns the to-dos that are done. I have logged that out. I have not logged that out here. I will log it out now though. In fact, actually, I can just do that. Done to-dos. Okay, so that's this one. So here are our done to-dos. Done text right to do this, and 1 is also done true. So it's filtered out this false one because it's not done. If this format looks confusing to you, you need to check out array.filter. There is a fantastic series of videos all about functional programming called Fun Function. I would highly recommend checking these out. I will put links to them in the description. Another array method similar to filter is map, and we're using that for done to do's text, which takes in both the state and the getters, and it allows us to say getters dot done to do's, which is whatever's returned from this, and map. And instead of just returning the entire to do object like we have here, we return the to do dot text, which we are logging out here and comes out here. So we've just literally got an array of the to-do text. Write to-do list and check this item off. And finally, very similar to how we mapped the store, map the state, was it map state? I can't remember. Yes, map state. Before, we just changed it to map getters, and we have done to do's text. So we are pulling out the done to do's text into our counter component, which is now no longer a counter, and we are just echoing out the first one in this done to do's array. So orit planet now tells us to write a to do list. Yeah, a very contrived example, but we're learning. We hack away at things. We figure out what does what, and just play about, change things, see what breaks, see what happens. Next, mutations. Let's get reading. Okay, so mutations. They are a little bit more complicated than that. The first example made them out to be, which makes sense. They should be a little bit more complicated than that. So Vue doesn't seem all Vuex, sorry, doesn't seem all that opinionated on how you call these. So I've got the increment mutation from before. I have allowed you to have a payload which defaults to an amount of 1. I then log out that payload just to see what you've passed it, and then we tell the count to increment by the payload amount, which defaults to 1. Yeah, there are 3 or 4 ways of calling this. Where the first way is the way we were doing it before. I can get rid of that actually. I can get rid of these logs because I've put the logs up there. So we just say store.commit increment, and it calls this function. And because we've not passed it a payload, it sets the default payload to the amount of 1, so it increases it with an amount of 1. And the counter is then 1 because it started at 0. The other way of doing it is by passing it a payload, and we say we want to commit an increment with an amount of, in this case, 10. And you can see here we get an amount of 10. And the third way is you can skip out this increment step entirely and set it as a type on this object. So there's obviously something behind the scenes somewhere that checks if this is a string or if it's an object, and if it's an object then you pull out that type to get the type. If not, then you get this first string. The other way, I have pulled this into the component here, but basically what we do is we set a method on this counter and we map the mutations. We pull out the increment and apply it to the methods. So then we can call on click and we increment by, in this case, an amount of 1. Let me see if that does it let us do it. Yeah, so by default, increment is an amount of 1. So we increment the counter every time we click on it now with an amount of 1. Or we can set in here an amount of 2. It's called wild, and we increase by 2 every time we click on it. I'm assuming we can do -2 as well. Yeah, we can. Irrelevant. The point is we get all these actions. Now, in theory, I've not actually tested this yet, but I'm logging all these to the console, which is fine, but we shouldn't need to do this. So if I get rid of that, I'm going to get rid of these 2, and I open up the Vue DevTools, and we look at mutations. We have the base state because we've done nothing, and then yes, it works. So we called increment here. So this is the current state. The count is -2 because we've still set this to take 2 away every time we click. The mutation with a type of increment with a payload of amount -2, and we can add a few of them. You can see we've got -14. We can go in and we can. Well, I'm assuming that removes it. So that removes everything from there. We can remove the last one. Yeah. So 6. to back to 0. And we can do revert back to this point, I'm assuming. Yeah, this is a time travel thing that was mentioned earlier, so we can jump forwards in time in theory. So commit this mutation. Oh, I don't know. This is a time travel thing. It's not overly helpful at this point, but it'll become a lot more helpful further down the line. Now, the last thing this mutations page mentions is on to actions. I don't know how they handle them. Let's have a read and let's find out. Okay, so I'll be honest, actions confuse me a little bit. I think the issue I'm getting here is that actions are supposed to handle async operations better than mutations, but I've so far not encountered an issue with mutations and async operations, which is why I'm maybe not fully understanding the benefits of actions just yet. I have messed about with async and await, which is it basically promises. Don't worry too much about that. Basically, this just says wait for the dummy API call to finish before we commit this increment. I have created an action called increment, which is why increment now has a delay, because instead of just straight up running the increment mutation, we say await this dummy API call. And when that's completed, then we increment by the amount returned from this dummy API call. Maybe would make more sense if I was to do payload and then do that. Payload.amount. That's maybe more. So this is the response, would maybe be a better word. Response is, so the response is the result of this dummy API call, and then when that API call is completed, we commit an increment mutation with an amount of what the response.amount is. So this is kind of mimicking an API call, and to dummy this API call, I have just returned a new promise that resolves with after 1 second of, actually this will need to also change with an amount of 1 after 1 second. So you can see we click add 1, and then 1 second later, as well. For example, maybe you would fetch the comments for an image, so you would click show comments, and then that would call an action as opposed to a mutation, because we don't know what them comments are yet, and that action would go ask for them comments, and when it has got them, it will then commit a show comments mutation with all the comments that it has returned from the API. That makes sense. Again, it'll make a lot more sense, I would assume, once we start getting into using the app and not being out of demo land where everything is fine and the only reason that there's a delay on here is because we've explicitly said it. And we pull these mutations in the same way that we did with the actions and the state. This uses the ES6 spread operator, so obviously we couldn't just say map mutations and map actions like that, because it just generates weirdness. So we use the spread operator here. Look at the description for an example on spread, because pretty good. ES6 is, if you've not learned ES6, I would recommend learning it. There's all sorts of things like this that could really help out and can confuse you if you don't know what's happening. I keep saying ES6. I should say that it's now ES 2015. Okay, so that's actions. We have one thing left, and that is modules. So one more time, let's get reading. Okay, so modules, they seem to be both very simple and very complex all at the same time. The simple part of it is basically modules allow you to fragment your store into, well, modules. So if you've used reducers in Redux, my understanding of this is kind of like combined reducers. So where you have, in Redux, you would have different reducers for different things, and then you would combine all your reducers at the end. In this, we have modules. So the example is module A, module B, and then when we create a new Vue store, we have the modules inside there. So we pull in module A and module B, and then there's our store. So module A's store state, would be store.state.a, and module B would be store.state.b. So it's a way of splitting things up into more manageable chunks by the looks of it. And then it gets a little bit more complicated in that modules can communicate with other modules. There's namespace involved. So you can, I'm assuming, call an action that's set on one module from a different module. You can get data from a certain module from inside another module, and you can jump through them. Kind of, it gets very complicated very quickly here. But right now I don't think I need to worry about that. I think we've got enough with the state, the getters, the mutations, and the actions to get going. And when our application gets big enough to warrant separate modules, we can look into all the nuances of the separate modules and go from there. Like I said, we're going to be winging this kind of because we're learning, and the best way to learn is to just wing it, prod it, poke it, see what happens when you change things. Next, there is an example of some application structure, which is helpful, but I don't need to read it right now. Plugins, all I need to know is that plugins are a thing. I'm not going to be really writing any right now, so I'm not too bothered. I will look at them if and when I need to. Strict mode. To enable strict mode, simply pass in. Yep, so it's basically there's dev and production modes of Vuex. I just need to know that they exist. I don't need to worry about them right now, as we're not sorting any build scripts. Form handling. They have ways to deal with forms, but again, I don't need to worry about that right now. I just know that there is a way of handling forms in here. Same with testing. I assume because it's a Redux style thing that testing is going to be fairly straightforward as far as testing usually goes. It should be easy to reason with. It should be easy to unit test. Fairly standard Mocha, Karma stuff. I don't need to know how we do this right now. I just need to know that it exists. Next, hot reloading. Again, great that it does it. Don't need to worry about it right now. And there is an API reference. So we're going to keep coming back to this documentation throughout the creation of the app. I don't need to worry about it too much right now. We've got the core concepts down. We've got started. I've had a play about and made a very simple counter. We looked at getters with the state to-dos. Getters are really nice. I really like the idea of getters. We've looked at mutations. We've looked at actions. We've looked at general Vue components, which are similar to how we did them before. And we looked at a few different bits and pieces there, but I think it's about time to get out of the dummy scratch pad boilerplate sandbox nonsense and start getting into making the app. We're going to fall over a few times, that's fine, I expect that. It's a learning experience. Next time we are going to create a proper application, Devs Against Humanity. If you've ever played Cards Against Humanity, you can pretty much just skip this entire bit because I'm just explaining how Cards Against Humanity works. Basically, it's this. In Cards Against Humanity, you have black cards and you have white cards. Black cards have a set of phrases on them, generally with blanks in, and the white cards have a set of smaller phrases on that fill in the blanks. For example, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Our chief weapons are fear, surprise, and Tom Cruise. Each turn, one player becomes the card slav. The dealer. That player then turns over a black card, the Spanish Inquisition card from before, and all the other players have to take it in turns to add in a white card that matches the phrase on the black card. So, for example, player 1 plays Tom Cruise, player 2 plays a falcon with a cap on his head. These cards are submitted anonymously and given to the player who drew the black card. That player then looks at these cards and decides which one is the funniest. I must stress, Cards Against Humanity is not a family-friendly game. It's pretty offensive. It's probably insensitive. It's definitely insensitive. So we are not going to use these. We're going to come up with our own. In order to keep the spirit of the card game, we're going to split the game across multiple devices. There will be a game device. This will display the table, it will display the player things, it will display the most recent black card, and it generally keeps track of the game. Then each player will have their own device, and these devices will have that player's hand, that can only be seen by that player. They can then select what card they want, which will then be sent to the device, the game device, and it works kind of like that. This may seem a little bit over the top, but it's all for good reason. The reason I'm doing this is because it touches on pretty much every state management issue that you could have. It's got multiple users on different devices, all updating the same state, and it's got a central location that needs to store that state. We need to be able to have users drop off if their phone gets locked or whatever, and be able to come back in and continue where they left off, and that state to never be out of sync with any of the other players or the game device. It's basically a very complex problem to solve without something like Vuex. Next time, we will be getting started with the fun stuff. We will start to make our first Vuex app. We're going to get out of the scratchpad nonsense and we're going to get into the actual making of our Devs Against Humanity app. I will open up a repo and make it public so you can all follow along. But for now, read up on the rules of Cards Against Humanity, read up on the rules of Vuex, have a little tinker, have a play with Vue, do kind of what I've been doing in this video, but on your own time, just play about, try and break it, see what happens. Also, I would recommend reading up on ES 2015 if you haven't already. Like I say, it will be used very heavily throughout the app. There is a link to a series in the description that will really help you out with this. These videos will be coming out on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of every single month, making the next one the 14th of December. To be sure you don't miss it, click the subscribe button down here. We also post talks on the 3rd Thursday of every month from our meetup, Frontend NE. Be sure to check them out here. You who've been watching, I have no idea what I'm doing. Now, because I'm learning along with you, chances are I'll get some of these things wrong, so if I do, feel free to tell me in the comments or on Twitter at FrontendNE. So, I'll see you in 2 weeks, but until then, remember,